Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a day here, local to this guy and his mind. Now, so I have a few toys I want to play with today, but before I do that, I want to expand a bit on contagion and similitude in Heka, or magic, as they relate to the Dandelion toy, which I've been a bit clumsily elucidating over the past few days. I hope that some of you are enjoying that. I'm going to get much deeper into the contagion and similitude thing as it relates to the Dandelion today, here, on this episode of Darren Walks and Talks. I wish you were all here with me. It'd be great if we were in a room together. The internet isn't a room, but I'm very grateful to have this time to learn and explore, just to be alive. It's pretty amazing, miraculous actually. Impossible if we take the word, seriously. I can see some actual dandelions around me. They're in the flowering phase, not the puffball phase, and it's the puffball phase. I mean, both phases work. Notice that there are different phases, right? And all of life is like this. It goes through these phases. The humans are inclined to think that death is the end of phases. There's no chance of that being true, nor is birth the beginning of phases. Although if you limit your view to a specific phase space in the dandelion, that looks realistic-ish. So let's talk more about contagion and similitude and magic. So all that you do here, everything you do, everything you say, everything you don't do, both of these things, all of these things, it's a vast manifold of partial doings and partial not doings and so forth. And in Castaneden tradition, which I think is actually a broad array of traditions now, not doing and stopping the mind are urgent prerequisites to the development of a nahual. And it's very difficult to say what a nahual is. It's not one thing. But in some ways, it's a human being that has transcended the trap layer of their humanity and has now acquired new degrees of freedom in both exploring something like the dandelion and forging and enacting their will, which is now free of most of the accoutrement of the trap systems. Very hard to capture and very powerful. But it also kind of means not bound to location, time, identity, form, right? Free in those ways. There are many traditions that seek this. Excuse me. Why would it be powerful to, quote, stop the mind erase personal history, no longer be bound to that. I can't remember what the second principle was. So the reason it's powerful is that, well, one reason, one feature of its power, is a better way of saying it, is that the catastrophic investments required to sustain prison mind resemble those required to sustain a city like this one. You have to kill and destroy so much of the history and future of the world just to fund the nightmare prisoneering system that everyone celebrates. San Francisco's amazing. Sure, it's amazing. But it's amazing the way... It's a slow version of concentration camps, right? And a lot of the pain is distributed, most of the pain is distributed into the anciently conserved ecologies, which resembles selling your organs on the black market to buy little tchotchkes and Hello Kitty toys and fucking numbers in banks and things. Now, nobody would ever do that if they hadn't been conscripted, if everyone around them wasn't doing this with great enthusiasm. None of us would sign up. If we were free, we wouldn't pick that option, so we're not free. So the first thing is you disinvest all the energies that are captured to fund a bunch of nonsense. You know, your thinking, which is mostly nonsensical. The way that thinking works is it takes for granted the existence of a set, structured context in which to operate, and accepting that set and structure, it then proceeds to make evaluations within it without regard to anything resembling intelligence or what's really going on, so forth. There's a great example of this. I'm not sure where I caught this. Could have been from the Gilchrist, probably was. Most likely the Master and his emissary, where I think they're talking to indigenous, a para-indigenous person from Siberia, perhaps, and the interlocutor says something like, there are no camels in France. Paris is a city in France. Are there any camels there? Now, the left hemisphere-like thinking aspect basically just accepts the syllogistic structure and will answer no, right? Because Paris is a city in France, there's no camels in France, according to this guy. But the person who was being interviewed said yes, there are camels in France. And the interviewer said, but I've told, or there are camels in Paris, excuse me. So the interviewer said, but I've told you that Paris is in France, and there are no camels in France. And the indigenous person says, yes, you did tell me that. But as Paris is a very complex city, it follows that there are surely a camel or two there. Right, so this is more like the right hemisphere's way of being in the world. It notices the language, knows where to distrust it, and makes a different move. Right. Now, one of these moves is more like thinking, and it isn't the one that follows the syllogism. And we tend to do this other one. So, magic can be understood as having to do with changing situations in the physical layer in order to affect their histories and futures in the other registers of the dandelion. Right? I was using the example yesterday of having a menagerie of toy animals and monsters and things when I was a little kid, and I treasured it. And what I will argue is that this both recognizes the actual structure of nature, the plants and animals, the insects, the living places, they are our own body. And even though the toys are representations, right, they're a bit like talismans, and collecting them together in one place changes that place's character as the dandelion collapses from, Darren's childhood bedroom and Darren into the other registers of the dandelion, into unity, where those characteristics are universally shared, and that changes the expression from unity across the registers of, unity, impossibility, possibility, probability, semi-determinism, the physical layer, like the rind of a grapefruit or orange or strawberry, and also the representational layer, which is a special thing that at least around here humans create, sustain, confuse themselves with, and so forth. So the existence of my menagerie is a magical magnet, transformer, that structures the physical layer in such a way as to affect the before and after of time, place, relation, so forth. Now, devotion, particularly metaphysical devotion to a guru or a saint or an angel or God, however we may represent those things, has a similar feature, right? But it's not just the devotion that collapses into and instructs the dandelion and then expands out of and instructs both the dandelion and the physical layer and the relationships in the physical layer. It's the character of the devotion. Right? If the devotion, for example, is organized primarily by fear or sort of bet hedging, right? Well, I'm not sure there's a God, but I'm going to pray just in case because, right? That is false relation, right? I don't actually love you, but I'm going to pretend to love you because there could be benefits in loving you. I think I had a close friend who was doing something like this with me recently. They seemed to have pretended to be my friend, while actually really just doing some bet hedging and surreptitious evaluation games. And then eventually came out and said, not only am I not your friend, you're a bad person, you're an idiot, all these other things. Right? I thought we were actually friends. But on the other side of the, on the other wing of the bird of our relationship, something completely different from what I was imagining was at play. And mostly it was a play of absences. Masquerading as presences. Oh, something very weird is going on here with the birds. What's up with this? when we have relationships, those change the dandelion. They change the branchial structure, the Rouillard in Wolfram's thing. They transform it by introducing new features of communion and discommunion, and communion and eviction, and so forth. And if you think your rational mind is capable of like properly encompassing and manipulating the variable space in there, you're completely wrong. Like, you'd be better off having any other thought. The rational mind is a product of representational cognition. Actually, it's a very complex thing, what the rational mind is. How to put it? So the left hemisphere is kind of a play space for the possibility of stable structure over time, in service to the right hemisphere. But in McGilchrist and my arguments, I was making this argument long before he wrote his books. The problem is that the structure overwhelms its origins in the right hemisphere, so to speak. When I say these hemispheres, I mean their way of being in the world. Once there's sufficient structure established in the left hemisphere, it's like a laboratory, right, where a bunch of games are being played. And once that structure overwhelms its origin, it disappears the origin, right? Like a bad political situation in Guatemala or wherever. Yeah, it just disappears its origin. And it does that in the world of human behavior, relations, thought, what wins in culture or politics or religion. So it's an experimental meta-context for right hemispheric development that escapes its mandates and then dominates. And this begins to happen early in childhood. This is why we stop playing. It's not because you grow up. Nobody grows up. It's just nonsense. It's because the structure overwhelms its source. You can imagine, for example, a species where they just want to build endless machines and destroy everything alive. So what they do is they create a Dyson sphere. They enclose the sun in a structure that captures all of its energy, and then they just transmit that energy into machine factories that make machines that build machines that build machines that build machines. They unleash that on time-space. It ruins everything. First it ruins them and their world, but the machines can probably keep going. There's lots of science fiction about this sort of thing. Now the problem is that human technologies affect the interior registers and the history and future of all beings by affecting the dandelion. And the character of the effects of mechanisms on the dandelion is indescribably lethal. The novelty of organisms, they contribute novelty, communion, relation, integrity, truth, spirit, all these things, they sustain them naturally just by existing. Machines do the opposite. They make dead structure in time-space within the dandelion, just like they make dead structure here. So that's black magic, right? Those cars you see, they might as well be dead demons, right? And this is what I mean by a thrisp. It's not an organism, but it acts like one because it hitchhikes on human concern, mind space, behavior. I'm walking in a garden right now, and on my left is an endless line of cars. any intelligent organism would see the human relationship with machines as absolutely deadly and confusing, right? Like inexplicable. How could this possibly happen? But the way that it happens is that over time, yeah, it's complicated. That's one of my other topics, so I'll save it and stay with contagion and similitude. So all throughout history, indigenous peoples have employed these perceptions of contagion and similitude in behaviors that we moderns call magic. Right? We have like a special name for it. But it's unlikely they thought of it in that way. Some of them may have. What they probably thought of it as is gardening in the dandelion to both invite into expression in the physical and relational layer features that were beautiful, healthy, joyful, healing, profound, miraculous, and also to, what's the word I want? I could use the word inhibit, but that's not it. To prohibit, to actively prohibit the loss that leads to the death of our souls and our relationships and our planet. The absence as, presenting as presence problem. Right? When you see a car, you're seeing the complex absence of trillions of organisms, simple and complex. Historically, those lines have been ended. Futurally, those lines are missing, they're gone. And right now here you have the automobile, the auto moving, right? So in the dandelion, the existence of a car in the physical layer is the origin of dead histories and futures in the now and and future time. When the car collapses into the dandelion, trillions of times per billionth of a second or whatever, faster each moment, all those dead histories are killed in the dandelion, in the other registers. And down in the unity, you get a machine, right? You get something that can't be in singularity because it isn't a being. Now, you can make arguments, right? You could say, well, if the cars do that, don't the stones do that? No, the stones don't do that. The stones do the opposite of that. The stones are naturally produced by the dandelion and are structured in such a way as to support living beings. Also, they are novel in their internality, even though it may appear frozenly structured. That's not the case. It's a precursor form to greater complexity, right? So it's a platform from which you get the possibilities of organisms and minds and things. It's fertile and productive. The machine is the opposite of that. And this is why I want to keep a stark distinction between artificial objects and objects that are not artificial, or situations or beings or so forth. There are we have this idea in our Western mind of fetishes, right? Talismans, magical objects, the magician's wand, the robe, certain objects from animals and so forth. And effectively, it's possible to combine these into something that isn't a machine, but is a collection of relationships that a human brings together in this layer, and that in structures and also destructures in specific, hopefully desirable ways, its precursors and outcomes in the expansion, precursor, outcome collapse of the dandelion. So these aren't machines, right? They are features of nature collected together to produce a kind of a characteristic right, a spirit that has organs here that once belonged to plants and stones and animals and so forth, that affects the generative character, what is being generated within the dandelion. Now, the nature of the dandelion, similitude here, this plant looks like a heart. Turns out we use this plant to heal certain illnesses of the heart. Or this plant has characteristics that resemble characteristics of the heart, which is normally invisible to us, right? You have to cut human beings open, and there's a very strange universe in there that bears basically no resemblance to the rind, the skin outside. So indigenous peoples were learning. I started to tell the story of shaman pharmaceuticals, but I didn't finish it. The researcher that went down there was talking about the incredible botanical knowledge of the medicine people in this village that they visited. And I asked him, how did they learn which plants treated which diseases? Now, I knew the answer to this question, and so did he. But he got a weird look on his face because he was the CEO of a company, right? So there's certain things he's not supposed to say. And he said trial and error. And he was just lying. I'm not saying there was no trial and error involved, but that is certainly not how they learned which plants cure which diseases. They learned because they were intimate with the living cognitia, the layers of spirit, mind, awareness, origin, relationship, in the jungle where they dwelt. And so they found out by dreaming, by visioneering, by directly inquiring of the jungle, the animals and the plants, with their soul mind, not their thinking mind. And the thinking mind would reject all of this as nonsense. That's why he said, just like regular scientists, trial and error. Except that even regular scientists don't do that. Regular scientists rely on intuition and integrative intelligence over the continua of data. Yes, trial and error may be involved. It probably almost always is. Is that how they learn? No. Intuition can be understood as your unique connection with the myarch, the web of relationships that are personal to you, quote unquote, on the personal, in all of time, minds, and the structure of the dandelion. Now, similitude in this layer attracts what we could call the formative energies of similar features within the dandelion, And there's, there are millions of human behaviors that encode for this. The entire idea that is referred to with the marker manifestation in modern woo culture, and I'm not saying it's untrue, I'm saying the for sale versions are bad. Also, there's another feature where, unless you're particularly dim, you will realize that it would be very bad for you to receive what you want. Not universally, but especially if what you want is like sports cars and 9 houses and huge bank accounts and expanded mating opportunities and so forth. History is rife with stories about like the genie in the bottle. Oh, thank you for releasing me, I'll grant you 3 wishes. Worst thing that could probably happen to almost all of us. Because we can't see into time and we only very dimly see into relation. The things we want are misguided, and were they to be delivered, we would be destroyed. A lot of the time. So, but yes, you have a little fetish of some kind here in the physical layer. Or you have what are called heirlooms, right? Objects with profound sentimental value to you. Those actually have some of the spirit of other times and relationships in them. You could say spiritually or energetically. During my experience with the non-human intelligence, if I could touch a person's possessions, oh my God, books of their life would unfold in my mind, presuming that I was, intentionally focusing my awareness in that way, for that purpose. So the objects that are familiar to us acquire some of the fragrance of our spirit, our nature, our origin, and our future. This is why in many traditions we are advised to have, non-attachment, right? Because we don't want our soul distributed over a collection of objects, with some few exceptions. What we want is that energy directly available now, here, for development, exploration, healing, reconciliation, and so forth. So I hope that similitude. So here's the other problem, right? Imagine that somebody collects guns. What are the chances? There's this adage in theater, right? A gun in the first act always goes off in the third. So somebody collects guns. Or they collect money. And in either case, once you have enough money, it just tends to attract more money. Okay? And if you have a gun, that tends to attract other guns and violence. And this is because it structures the other registers of the dandelion toward that. So the similitude thing is hugely important. It's a central feature of nearly every magical system. If you want to speak with angels, purify your soul and your body so that the transport works well. It's well lubricated. There's less interference and noise, right, in the collapse and expansion of the dandelion and in your physical, location. Now, both of these principles, contagion and similitude, you see contagion working in the physical layer all the time, right? The internet is just like a contagion generating colloquium of demons, mostly. We could change that, and we should. I have models of how to do that. And then, COVID, cancer, all the diseases, they are transmitted. And notice we have this genetic predisposition feature, we think, in rational science, where vulnerabilities and strengths are transmitted generation to generation in cohorts. Pollen is contagion, right here. And lots of the features of contagion have to do with reproduction, which at the physical layer is super important. It's one of the best places to look if you want to understand the nature, activities, motivations, and character of the dandelion. Fragrance, right? The magic of fragrance is both similitude and contagion, and it's very uncommon to find just one of these in isolation from the other. There are two wings on the bird of Heka, and that bird has many wings. In ancient Egypt, if we take Schwaller de Lubitz seriously, which I argue we should very much avail ourselves of doing, he's saying something that he can't quite encode, though he probably does. I haven't read all of his work. I've read some pieces so far. Which is that the architecture of Egypt, and probably the structure of their society, and their behavior, can be understood as a representation of the dandelion, a reminder of its natures, and a physicalization of its structures. The unity, the impossibility, the possibility, and so on. And they saw, according to Lubitz, and I think there's something to this actually, that the human form around here was profoundly unique in its integration of all of these features. Though they also recognized the plants and animals similarly. I think they saw, according to Lubitz, they understood the human form and its proportions and features as a map of the divine, origin, world, and its organs. So that they measured out their temples and structures they built according to the template of the human body, in some cases, or even the interior anatomy of the human body, particularly the interior anatomy of the brain. This is similitude, but it's also contagion. Many of the great sages of ancient history had the birth of their wisdom either directly transmitted through contact with Egypt, visiting there, learning there, studying there, having transmission from existing humans and cohorts into their way of being in the world. So Egypt was very contagious, and it was so contagious that the modern humans do this insane thing, which capitalizes on the bigness of the pyramids, but not any of the other things. So we make these giant, penis with no balls towers, right? Which that structure is extremely, not just questionable, tends to be malignant. If you build a tower, there should be round things at the bottom. Should be obvious. The round things are the memory of the mothers, and the tower is the penetration into both the dandelion and time space. And it's a dumb idea to make dead structures with bad purposes, and then just reproduce those all over the planet. What a nightmare. When you relate with living beings, whether you're a gardener or you are an unusual person who has relationships with animals and living places and so forth, you're creating a bridge at the physical layer, but that bridge is translated into all the other layers of the dandelion such that the investments, quote unquote, they're not investments, but the relationships that you forge here are strengthened as they collapse into unity and expand back therefrom. Got some raven pairs here with me. A raven pair. They know I have the bird heroine. Similitude and Contagion. Now I've covered most of what I want, though I don't yet have a really striking, powerful metaphor for either of these. Probably I'll come up with one. Maybe not today. But I wanted to expand and highlight some of the features that I may have overlooked or somewhat casually pointed toward in the previous recording. Actually, there's a recording in between this one and the last one about the dandelion, but I'm not sure what order they'll get posted in yet. Now I have another topic that arose last night while I was talking with my friend. And it arose around a somewhat humorous but also rather dire trope. The ants, all of the insects are profoundly sensitive to extremely tiny features of the environment. They're exquisitely evolved molecular sensors, particularly the Hymenoptera, right, which are like ants, bees, wasps, hornets, and so forth, termites. So you can imagine a situation where an ant species is born scent blind, right? The central feature of their way of being in the world and orienting in the physical layer is missing, or it has gone missing. And these ants can't read pheromones. So they are blind in the most crucial feature of their anatomy, biology, and relationship with the physical layer. And what you can, in this science fiction tale, right, you can imagine that what they do is they build representations of fake scent, right? And they die a lot. They mostly just die. They wouldn't last long, because in the physical layer, if you attend representations instead of the physical layer, you obliterate yourself relatively quickly. Warning, humans, danger ahead. And it's mostly in your head, so danger is a human head. So in this analogy of the scent-blind ant species, we find an analogy of the problem with our species. And in this case, scent blindness is analogous to a problem in our interiority, where the one thing we were made to recognize and be oriented by is missing. What is that? So these are the senses of our souls, our soul faculties, right? From which you naturally recoil, not because you thought it out, because you can sense that this way of behaving is fundamentally injurious to the dandelion, your ancestors, your progeny, all beings. So you don't do that. Mostly you don't have to tell humans not to murder each other. By the time you have to tell them that, something's gone horrifically wrong with the humans. So in this analogy, the humans are like scent-blind ants, a vast soul-blind cohort. And the soul's faculties are imperative to orienting, correcting, developing, and interpreting our, the experience of our senses, our intuition, our will, our behavior, and so forth. So without those, what we do is we make representations of spirit things, right, which are lethal. Motorcycle's a great example. But the cars are basically, a double-sided motorcycle. The bicycle is actually much, much less horrific. And what the motorcycle is a representation of is the relationship you would have with an angel, where you would travel not over physical space, but in the dandelion, in the relational space between all beings and the intelligences that dwell in those relationships. Now, I'm not going to explain exactly why, but it has to do with wheels and spokes and things. Why the bicycle is a great representation of an angel. You'll notice, of course, that the wheels on motorcycles are usually, not always these days, filled with spokes. And as I'm walking past the cars, there's a highly geometric, numeric, spoke-like feature to what we call the hubcaps. Because the memory of the spinning wheels filled with eyes of the angels is in our species, and we represent that. Cars look like they have faces. The faces are basically demonic. They're not happy. They're very angry. They're very fierce. They're warlike. So we are like these scent-blind ants, right? Where scent is the moment-to-moment supervision and orientation in the lost spirit senses that would otherwise instruct and guide our interiorities, formations, our minds, our relationships, our behaviors, and would not prohibit, but they would disincline us to defection from our own nature, the Dandelion's character, and the spirit of origin and communion which pervades over all of time-space and is instanced in its forms and their relationships. But since we are scent-blind in this way, few of us, like the signal strength of our soul's intelligences, is overwhelmed by the signal strength of every other machine and ridiculous, prescriptive nonsense produced by humans primarily over the last few thousand years. Though there may have been other instances before that that were very problematical. So I found this toy hilarious because you can imagine like a bad cartoon where God is up there and says something like, I'm going to incarnate you as a scent-blind ant. Go! And then every kind of tragedy ensues. Of course, that's a cartoon. There's no God like that. And the problem in the Dandelion isn't God. It's the thing that replaces the spirit senses, which is mostly representational cognition in humans. Though there may be deeper features. Maybe there is something like the spirit of chaos, right? That is represented in certain Egyptian deities, we call them. I think they're more properly understood as principles. So, that's where I'm at for today. Thank you for joining me. I'm so grateful to have this time together. Your attention, your enthusiasm, your curiosity, the beauty of your origin and nature. May your ways be amazing and beautiful. May your dreams be healing and profound. And may those you love and those who love you and the living places and organisms where you live thrive and survive the human interregnum. Take a moment, if you will, and tickle the algorithm. Like or share or leave a comment or criticism or question, and I will respond. I wish you beauty, peace, and the fulfillment of the promise of your human incarnation. Thank you for joining me. We'll do this again sometime soon. Bye-bye for now.